Boyega's comments as hypocritical and contradictory. As Ada on Twitter said, John Boyega saying he dates only black women isn't a problem. Double standards is a problem. If a white actor said they only dated white women, many would not defend his right to have preferences. They would call him racist. The rules have to stay consistent, that's all. So does this show how deep the hypocrisy is, which lies in the heart of the elite when it comes to issues such as race? Joining me now to discuss this is activist and organiser of BLM protests, Iman Ayton, and political commentator Dominique Samuels. First of all, thank you both so much for joining me. I want to start with you, Iman. Try and keep it not too spicy. Is John Boyega a racist?
No, of course not. That's utterly ridiculous. No, he's not. So let's just start with laying it out there, okay? So this is about personal preferences, and personal preferences are influenced by many different factors, such as experiences, good, bad, and shared, values, friends, family, and of course, cultural and societal norms. So let's just take all of that into consideration and use education as an example, okay? So if someone was educated from Eton, it's quite likely that they'll have preferences, and their attraction is likely to be towards someone that is educated. The likelihood of that individual finding someone who is, I don't know, has very little education, no job or career prospects, and is currently on universal credit, that's unlikely in terms of that level of education.
These things are social.
Okay, and that's due to the aforementioned factors. So the point I'm trying to make, Calvin, thank you very much, is that I think it's quite ludicrous to penalise someone because of their personal preferences. We're influenced by all of these factors that I mentioned.
All right, thank you. We'll come back to you. Dominique, is this a personal preference or is this racial discrimination?
Look, I wouldn't necessarily say that it's racial discrimination as such, because, you know, you can't attack someone for having a racial preference in terms of dating, because whether we like to admit it or not, I think we all have an overarching preference in terms of the people we'd like to date. The problem is that the world that John Boyega inhibits, which is the virtue signalling, Hollywood world, they would see that as racist if a white person had said it. So it opens up a whole question about what sort of standards are allocated for certain groups. I personally think based upon sort of their social justice points. With black people, they're allowed to openly state they only date one race. But when it comes to white people, or even, cis women or cis lesbian or a cis gay person, they're not allowed to state their actual preferences without being called a transphobe, without being called a racist, without being called a bigot. So John Boyega is allowed to have his preference, that's fine, but it does highlight a hypocrisy that runs deep at the heart of the social justice movement.
Okay, so you're both in agreement that it's not racial discrimination. Iman, if a white actor came out and said, I don't date black women, would you have an issue with that? Because it seems it's the hypocrisy that people are struggling with.
I agree. So I definitely agree. It's a different conversation. So firstly, let me start with saying that I don't believe in cancel culture. I think it prohibits anyone from growing and learning from their mistakes. Secondly, I think John Boyega's level of influence pales in comparison to Eurocentrism or hundreds of years of Eurocentrism, racism and colonialism. So I actually think that his opinion is a healthy balance. And thirdly, we have to take into account Eurocentrism, which answers Dominique's point. So, in terms of Eurocentrism, this is a viewpoint whereby European culture is looked upon favourably and biased against non-Western cultures. So when we take into account historical context, as well as the fact that black people are still having to contend with racism, the connotations and implications are different when a white person says it versus a black person. For me, this is as clear as day. So I'm hoping I shouldn't have to repeat myself. Surely we understand that point, right?
Oh, understanding and agreeing are two different things, though, Iman. Dominique, do you think that Eurocentrism is a problem in the European continent? Surely it should be the case that we are centred around our own interests, whether that be British history, European history. These are clearly predominant because we live in a predominantly European part of the world.
Yeah, I would say that. I think that's largely to do with the fact that our culture is very Western-centric, and that just does so happen to be largely white people. I think that's just a fact. But I think what we've seen in particularly pop culture, Hollywood culture, is that looking more racially ambiguous, looking more black, if you will, is viewed as more desirable, having bigger hips, having darker skin, having bigger lips, having curly hair. So I wouldn't say it's fair to say Eurocentrism still reigns supreme today. I think our beauty standards are actually changing to appreciate more black features. However, I think what Iman has conceded there is that she thinks that double standards are okay if they reflect her moral sentiment. And as long as we can...
Oh, I said Dominique. Oh, wow. Really? It's like
you are okay with hypocrisy if it serves your moral sentiment. Then we can...
At what point did I say? At what point did I say...
Iman, we'll come back to you. Don't worry. We'll come back to you.
I explained the connotations and implications.
Iman, we will come back to you. Thank you. Dominique's turn to talk.
Let's not put words in my mouth, okay?
No, that's what you basically said. You've said double standards and hypocrisy are okay if they serve your moral sentiment or if you think they're morally justifiable. That's what you've just said. In my personal opinion, as someone who comes from a mixed race background, as Calvin's obviously mixed race, I do think the idea of singling out one race and saying you're not going to date any others. Bear in mind, these are millions and millions of people on the earth that look very, very different. I think that is, if we want to go to the raw meaning of the word racial discrimination, yes, it is. To say that you won't date any other race of people when there are loads on this earth that look very different, that is racial discrimination. Okay. If a white person had said, I only date white, I would think, sorry, and that is a bit weird that you would discriminate against other races of people on the basis of skin colour. And if a black person said it, I have the same opinion. In the rawest terms, without the moral connotations, it is discrimination.
All right, thank you, Dominique.
No, it's not.
Like to come back to
it's not. It's not even in the slightest, Dominic. You got it completely wrong. So let me just finalise that point. I've already explained it to you. The connotations and implications are different due to the historical context, racism, colonialism, Eurocentrism. You have to take those things into account. So in terms of there being an imbalance, it's quite clear there is an imbalance because we live in the West, and so we are taught things and we experience things through the Eurocentric perspective. And so ultimately what I'm trying to say is if one individual has a personal preference that's probably influenced by education, experiences, family, friends, culture, and societal norms. Hold on a second. Let me finish, please. So all of these factors influence someone's personal preference. Everyone is entitled to their personal preference because of all of those aforementioned factors. So John Boyega stating that he has a personal preference because of his culture, because of his experiences, because of his friends, because of his family, because of what he thinks or deems as attractive isn't racial discrimination. It's called a personal preference. And if you find it hypocritical, please bear in mind that we have had hundreds of years of Eurocentrism, colonialism, and racism. So the imbalance is already there. So in actual fact, John Boyega is trying to balance the current state of affairs.
I think you're conflating. Ladies, thank you.
You're using loads of words to repeat what I've just said, which is that you think discrimination is okay if in your mind it's morally justifiable. The moral justifiability.
What's discrimination? What's discrimination?
Let's not talk over each other. I've got one last question for you both, if you don't mind, please. Thank you, Iman. Thank you, Dominique. Now, one last question. Let's keep it short and sweet.
What's the definition of racial discrimination?
Ladies, the viewers have heard your stance. They'll make up their own minds.
Discrimination. You agree with me, babe?
What's the definition? What's the definition of racial discrimination, Dominique? Please tell us.
Discriminating against someone based on their race. Now, Iman, Dominique, thank you. Dominique. Iman, quick answer, please. Not a 5-minute answer. No. Would you date a white man?
Yes. To be honest with you, my preference is black men.
Okay, thank you.
But my preference is
black men. Dominique, would you date a white man?
Yes, I'd date a white man, I'd date a black man, I'd date a Chinese man, Asian man, whatever. I genuinely don't care.